Welcome to the Jenna Ellis Show, sponsored by Legacy Precious Metals. There has never been a better time to invest in precious metals. Visit legacypminvestments.com. That's legacypminvestments.com. Good evening and welcome to Jenna Ellis Tonight. Well, Donald Trump has until Monday to post a $434 million appeal bond. This coming out of the New York civil fraud case from Letitia James. So ABC News posted this. The New York AG pushes back on Trump's extraordinary request to stay the $464 million fraud judgment. New York Attorney General Letitia James is pushing back on Donald Trump's extraordinary request, arguing the former president's recent request was unreliable, procedurally improper, and based on a flawed premise. Quote, there is nothing unusual about even billion-dollar judgments being fully bonded on appeal, Senior Assistant Solicitor General Dennis Fan said in a filing this morning. Quote, defendants object to a possible fire sale if they were to sell assets to generate cash to use as collateral for a bond or as a deposit. But the alternative would be to shift the risk of executing on defendants' illiquid assets to the Office of the Attorney General. Earlier this week, Trump's lawyers argued that the former president is unable to secure a bond for the judgment, having been rejected by over 30 insurance companies due to its size and his need to post properties as collateral. Abe Hamilton III is the host of the Hamilton Corner on American Family Radio Network, where I also host Jenna Ellis in the morning, and he joins me now. So, Abe, this to me seems like a ridiculously excessive fine, and shouldn't the judge here allow Trump to post a minimal bond in order to exercise his due process rights to appeal?
You're absolutely right. This bodes toward nothing other than the courts continue to harass former President Trump. The purpose of the appeal bond is simply to have a placeholder while the former president executes his rights to appeal. You know, it's not as if he's trying to skirt the judgment. It's not as if they don't know where he lives. It's not as if they don't know where to go if something were to happen in the interim. And so this just continues that same process. And so when you see the entire judiciary and the legal strata of New York weaponized against the former president, it's no wonder you have people afraid to do business with him, even in the sense of providing surety for a bond. And it also is, contrary to what Letitia James's office said, sureties are not used to dealing with $1 billion for appeal bonds. That's just the fundamental reality of what it is. And many people may not be aware that in order to secure the bond, you have to have assets that are supplied that far exceed even the fine. So even though the fine is $450 million or so, the bond assets would have to approach $1 billion in order for a surety to put their names on the line for that. And as it's reported, 30 companies have declined to do so. This is seemingly particularly contrived to continue to harass the former president.
Well, and Letitia James even ran for New York State Attorney General on the premise that she was going to get Trump for something. And so now if Trump is unable to post this $434 million bond and it isn't lowered by the court to allow him to meet that, then reports are suggesting that Letitia James can go and start seizing his assets. I mean, what would this look like in terms of the political fallout heading into 2024 to have, Trump Tower potentially seized and padlocked, and even Dan Rather weighed in this morning in a post on social media suggesting that Mar-a-Lago should be seized.
Wow, which is pretty interesting. Kevin O'Leary from Shark Tank had a lot to say in this regard. It would be politically, it would be actually a boon toward President Trump to continue his posture of being persecuted through lawfare. But even worse than that, I think it would be an additional negative impact on the state of New York, because other business people are paying attention to this, and they will see this as an indication that maybe we need to get ourselves and our assets out of the state of New York.
Yeah, and to that point, too, and Kevin O'Leary kind of pushing back and saying that this would have a chilling effect impact on, businesses overall in New York. We're so focused on this being Donald Trump, but really, what does this say about potentially restructuring how this whole civil process works? I mean, there's been a lot of discussion about civil asset forfeiture, some of these other things, tort reform for excessive fines that are imposed. I mean, all of these things that seem to undermine legitimacy in the process and justice ultimately. Where in your mind, as a lawyer yourself as well, should this case go in a broader policy sense?
Yeah, in the broader sense, the judiciary has an interest in making sure litigants, defendants, accused parties have the full scope of opportunities before the court, regardless if they prevail or not. What the district court is attempting to do is hinder the president's opportunity to appeal their decision. When you have the reality on the ground, the accusation is an inflation of assets in order to secure lending that the former president has already paid back with interest. The banks had no problems with the assets that were represented. They considered the risk in their contractual arrangement with the former president and his organization as to whether or not they would lend him the money. They took the risk. The risk paid off for them, benefited them. The president paid off the loan, and it shows that even if you do all of that, if the government does not like you in that state, they'll find a way to prosecute you. And this has no bearing on whether or not you support the former president's candidacy for the presidency now, whether you like him, you dislike him. This has a broader impact upon the justice system in our nation. We already have lots of Americans who have become quite a bit dismayed with the state of justice in our country. This is going to be another blow in that regard. And it shouldn't be lost on people that this is happening in the exact same state where squatters now are being able to take over $1 million residences if you happen not to be home long enough.
Yeah, isn't that wild that, this juxtaposition of what's happening to President Trump in New York versus, these so-called squatter rights. I mean, it seems like just justice is completely unfair here. And you're absolutely right, Abe Hamilton, that this isn't just about whether you love or hate Donald Trump or your position on 2024. This ultimately, just like the presidential immunity question that is pending before the Supreme Court, their response on the Colorado ballot issue. I mean, all of these things are fundamental to justice, the way that we do politics, the way our constitutional republic operates. This is way more than just President Trump. But in just about the last 45 seconds here, what about the Eighth Amendment and the excessive fines clause there? Is it possible that Trump has any sort of redress in that particular substantive area of the Constitution?
I believe so, especially with the pendency of the appeal. Regardless of the judgment, the final judgment, the excessive fines provision of the Eighth Amendment will have bearing on whether or not he should be allowed to appeal the judgment from the district court level. And so I do think you're going to expect to see case law even jurisdictions that ultimately would be in the Second Circuit, where New York is, if it makes its way up to the federal system, that you'll see courts weigh in to say, wait a minute, the excessive fines provision will prohibit a court from eliminating a litigant's opportunity to exercise to fully exhaust all of the remedies available by something as fundamental and foundational to the system as a bonding provision.
Yeah, and we got to leave it there. But Abe Hamilton, really appreciate it. We'll be right back with more. Throughout history, there are clear moments that define our nation's path. And now you can own a piece of that history. I'm thrilled to announce the official Newt Gingrich contract with America Coin from our friends at Legacy Precious Metals in partnership with Speaker Gingrich. This limited edition 1 ounce 99.99% silver coin commemorates the historic victory in 1994 when the Republican Party, under Speaker Gingrich's guidance, took control of Congress. The Newt Gingrich contract with America Coin also symbolizes the transformative political platform that led to the landmark achievements like the overhaul of the U.S. welfare system and the Balanced Budget Act. This is a limited edition coin that will sell out. So whether you're looking for the perfect gift or you want to own a piece of history, act fast before they run out. The Newt Gingrich contract with America Coin is more than an investment. It's a tribute to honest government and America. You can order it online at newtgingrichsilvercoin.com. That's newtgingrichsilvercoin.com and use promo code Jenna, that's JENNA, to get $10 off your purchase. Go to newtgingrichsilvercoin.com now. And now it's time for everybody's favorite panel of the week, our Thursday Roundup. Joining me for the Power Panel this week is John Jackson, who is the Democrat strategist, Mark Lauder, who is the Chief Communications Officer for the America First Policy Institute, and John Cardillo, who is a former New York Police Department officer and a Republican strategist. So, gentlemen, welcome, and thanks so much for joining.
Thanks for
having me.
Thanks. Awesome. All right. So we're going to continue this conversation about Trump's bond that is falling due on Monday. This is what his attorney, Alina Habba, had to say.
Well, there's rules and regulations that are public. I can't speak about strategy that require certain things, and we have to follow those rules. Like I said, this is manifest injustice. It is impossible. It's an impossibility. I believe they knew that. I think that's why mid-trial, frankly, they changed their ask from $250 million to the ridiculous amount of money that they've asked for. I think everything is done intentionally. I do not doubt that the witch hunt, that the election interference goal is what was ringing steady and loudly and true throughout all these trials, frankly. And we're seeing it. It's the demise of our country, not the demise of Trump. So we'll handle it as we always have and keep our heads up and keep working hard.
Witch hunt, election interference, the demise not of Trump, but of our country. John Cardillo, is she right?
Yeah, I think she is. Look, I've been critical of Trump, but it baffles me why every CEO of every business in New York, their lobbyists and lawyers are not on Kathy Hochul and Letitia James's doorstep screaming bloody murder, because this has nothing to do with Donald Trump. I mean, it certainly does, and it's a witch hunt, and they went after him. But the precedent this has set, if the appellate division or the New York State Court of Appeals doesn't just overturn this trash, but throw it out, is that a biased judge can arbitrarily decide what your business is worth, flying in the face, his estimates flying in the face of every expert, every comp, every comparative analysis, competitive landscape that contradicts what that judge feels the valuation is. And that judge then can take his own valuation, impose a draconian fine, and ban you and your family from running the company your family built nearly 100 years ago. Why every business in New York State is not beating down the doors, metaphorically, of the governor's office, demanding this nonsense be reversed, is beyond me. This is a travesty of justice. And I've been critical of Trump. I've been critical of Habba and her legal strategies. But on this one, I got to give it to her. This is insanity, Jenna, and it's un-American.
Yeah, well, Mark Lauder, Donald Trump posted on Truth Social earlier today, and let's bring that up. And he said this: "Even though I did nothing wrong, a radical left New York judge, a true Trump hater, Arthur Engoron, are we allowed to speak about his unconstitutional gag order, picked a number out of thin air, $355 million plus interest, reminiscent of John Lovett's The Liar on SNL when it was good, and wants me to bond it, which is not possible for bonding companies to do in such a high amount before I can even appeal. That is crazy. If I sold assets and then won the appeal, the assets would be forever gone. Also, putting up money before an appeal is very expensive. When I win the appeal, all of that money is gone, and I would have done nothing wrong. The crooked judge, who has already been overturned 4 times on this case, a record, fully understands this. He gave us a demand which he knows is impossible to do. This witch hunt between a bad judge and a corrupt and racist attorney general is horrible for New York. Businesses are fleeing while violent crime flourishes. Election interference." Your reaction?
No, the president's absolutely right. I mean, let's first off remember that the law they're using to charge President Trump had never been used before in this manner. There is also no victim in this crime. Deutsche Bank actually testified on behalf of President Trump that they were not defrauded. They got paid back in full with interest early. So now you're charging a crime with no victim, and then you've got this outrageous penalty, which can't be met. And to force the president to sell assets or to give up money just to appeal this, I mean, it's outrageous. If you sell the asset, like the president said, you're not getting it back afterwards. And I actually think this is just another example of the Democrats overplaying their hand. They thought they got what they wanted with the mugshot. That backfired on them. Put a padlock on Trump Tower and see how this goes for them. It will backfire again. The American people see the nonsense that's going on here.
So, John Jackson, let's bring you into this. As a Democrat strategist, do you think that the Democrats are overplaying their hand? I mean, everybody knows that Letitia James ran on this premise of getting Trump. So, how is this going to play for Democrats in 2024?
I think the only thing that can change the dynamic of this election is a criminal conviction for Trump. That'll influence, it won't influence Republican turnout. It'll drive Republican turnout, but it'll influence independent voters. I don't think what's happening in New York will impact the election one way or the other. Trump is going to raise the money to do what he needs to do if he doesn't have the money, because he's got real support in this country. But I also think this is an opportunity to extend to the right side of the aisle that the justice system isn't fair. It's not just unfair to Donald Trump. Think about, if it's unfair to a billionaire, think about how unfair it might be to everyday people. I think there's a bipartisan opportunity here if Republicans get the big picture.
And Mark Lauder, we'll give you the last word on this. Do you think that there is any sort of maybe bipartisan solutions that John Jackson is talking about? When clearly, I don't think Democrats, by and large, are as reasonable as he is to say that maybe this is unfair to Donald Trump.
Well, I think many of the American people, including many independents, can see that it's patently unfair, that there is one standard of justice for Trump. There's one standard of justice for liberals and for Democrats and for Joe Biden and his family. But ultimately, I think the American people don't care about any of it. They're going to say, look, Trump has his legal challenges. Joe Biden should have legal challenges. Both of them have classified documents. And at the end of the day, who's going to lower gas prices? Who's going to deal with crime, sky high prices, secure the border? And the answer to all of that is not Joe Biden. It's Donald Trump. And I think that's where people are actually going to be voting.
Yeah, well, and speaking of that, that will lead us into our next panel. We got to take a break here about Biden's push now for 50% of electric vehicles. I mean, I have a regular car that I really like, and I'm definitely not going to get an EV. But we're going to talk about that with our power panel coming up right after this. As you know, my friend Mike Lindell has a passion to help everyone get the best sleep of their life. He didn't stop by simply creating the best pillow. Mike created the Giza Dream bed sheets. They look and feel great, which means an even better night's sleep for me, which is crucial for my busy schedule. Mike found the world's best cotton. It is ultra soft and breathable, but extremely durable. Mike's Giza sheets come with a 60-day money-back guarantee and a 10-year warranty. The Giza Dream Sheets come in a variety of sizes and colors. Mike's latest incredible deal is the sale of the year. For a limited time, you will receive 50% off the Giza Dream Sheets. You will also receive a set for as low as $29.98. So go to mypillow.com, click on the radio podcast square, and use the promo code Jenna. There you will find not only this amazing offer, but also deep discounts on all MyPillow products, including the MyPillow 2.0 mattress topper, which I have and I love, the MyPillow kitchen towel sets, and now even flannel sheets and so much more. We definitely need flannel sheets for as crazy as all of this weather has been lately. So go to mypillow.com and make sure you use the promo code Jenna or call 1-800-564-8475. That's 1-800-564-8475 and use the promo code Jenna. And back with today's Thursday Roundup and our power panel, John Jackson, Mark Lauder, and John Cardillo. So, gentlemen, let's talk about the EPA's restrictions potentially on EVs. This coming from PJ Media. The EPA is about to outlaw your car. Outlaw your car sounds like such an outrageous phrase, but technically speaking, it isn't true, but only barely. And what practical difference is there between outlawing something and regulating it out of existence? That's exactly what the EPA intends to do this week with strict new rules going forward against gas and diesel-powered cars and light trucks. Expected as soon as Wednesday, the Biden EPA, quote, is poised to finalize emissions rules that will effectively require a certain percentage, as much as 2/3 by 2032, of new cars to be all electric, according to Inside EVs. Politico sells the expected rule as one that would, quote, tackle the nation's biggest source of plant warming pollution and accelerate the transition to electric vehicles. So, John Jackson, let's start with you. This seems a little outrageous, and I don't think that the voters are going to like this moving forward into 2024.
So, I look at something like this as really kind of pandering to your coastal elite liberals. It doesn't really serve the working class base of the Democratic Party very well. And I really think as far as the environment is concerned, the EPA, the Biden administration, should get different priorities, because this is not a working class serving priority, and the Democratic base is overwhelmingly working class. So it's a bit of a disappointment.
Yeah, well, I wish that the Biden administration would listen to you. But John Cardillo, let's go to you. This is completely ridiculous, and I think also impractical when we're seeing especially some of these headlines like what happened in Texas when their grid went down and then EVs were just basically dead for 2 weeks. I mean, how can the Biden administration possibly think that Americans could survive on this?
Yeah, look, it's impossible, right? Recently, a few weeks ago, the global CEO, the global head of Toyota, came out and said that they're going to move away from all electric to electric hybrid and various iterations of that. And he basically did an analysis where, depending on that level of hybrid, for the economic impact of building 6 pure EVs is the same as building 60 or 600 of the hybrids. Look, I do some business over in Europe and the Balkans. I've been to lithium mines. If these leftists ever showed their base photos and video of what these lithium mines look like, the damage to the earth, it looks like this area was hit by a nuke with these massive craters in this strip mining. To pull enough lithium for 100 or 1,000 batteries, they would be laughing the Democrats out of office at the notion that you could make a couple of 100 million vehicles. The capabilities just aren't there. We saw that EVs don't have the distance that they claim to have, depending on different driving conditions. Taking a road trip with your family, an infant, your pregnant wife, your elderly grandmother, and having to stop for 30, 45 minutes to plug your vehicle in if you can find a charger. The technology simply is not there. And the auto industry knows this. But like the banking industry, with all the woke banking and the debanking, they are terrified by the lawfare handed down by Democrats. So if an American auto CEO says EVs are not just impractical across the board, they're impossible, they are going to be met with a regulatory onslaught you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy. So this is a problem with Democrats pushing their agenda despite what's good for Americans, as John said, for the working class. Tell the plumber who needs that van and drives 200 miles a day that he's got to go spend $100,000 on an EV car that can't fit all his tools. Oh, by the way, and in the middle of his workday, when he's back to back with jobs, he's got to stop for an hour to plug his car in. It is so preposterous. The Democrats should be laughed out of office for this one.
Yeah, well, Mark Lauder, Trump was laughing at them on Saturday at his rally in Ohio when he was talking about the automotive industry and how this would be a bloodbath in terms of the regulations and some of those things, not particularly to EVs, but he was talking about the automaking industry overall. And yet the mainstream media wanted to focus on that term bloodbath instead of actually talking about policy when it comes to the automotive industry. How important is this for the Trump campaign to message and not be so focused on what the mainstream media wants them to focus on, but actual policy?
Well, I think this is extremely important and a huge gift to the president and his campaign. Look, where I work at the America First Policy Institute, we did an academic study, and our economists say that a switch to EVs is going to cost 117,000 auto workers their jobs in Michigan, Indiana, and Ohio. Well, Michigan is a swing state. And that is devastating to a campaign, the Biden campaign. When you're going there, you're already dealing with your woke progressive left on the whole Israel-Hamas thing. And now you're telling auto workers we're going to put you out of work and basically let China start producing cars, electric cars in Mexico and ship them across the border to the U.S. I mean, this is devastating. And then just to everyday mom and pops out there, they don't want an EV. It's about 8% of the market right now. And I have no problem with EVs when you can get me the range and let me recharge in the time it takes me to fill my gas tank, I'll take a look at it. Until then, don't force me to do it. And that's what this mandate is trying to do, trying to tell the American people, you don't get to buy what you want. You get to buy what I'm telling you you have to buy.
And John Jackson, Mark Lauder raises a really good point that, this is going to affect the auto industry and particularly workers in, some of these swing states like Michigan and Ohio. Is there any topic like this, or maybe the border, or even, the headlines coming out that now, a court is suggesting that and allowing for illegals to own firearms when the courts and the woke courts have foreclosed that right for American citizens? I mean, are there topics that are so concerning that you think that Democrats would actually consider, the reasonable ones, voting for Donald Trump over Joe Biden?
Well, I think that there is, in the Democratic Party, and I've known this for years, there's a clash between the labor and environmental wing. It happens at every single level. And we saw in 2016, Trump dipped into what was some of the traditional Democratic base in the Rust Belt. And I think that the Biden administration needs to be careful not to lose that labor union base in the Rust Belt with moves that are not to their best interests. I think that Trump is very good at messaging those types of folks, which is why he was particularly strong in the Rust Belt when he won in 2016. So I think it's definitely, if I were to bet on one side that the Democrats should go with the labor side. Go all out for labor over in the environmental. I think that's gonna.
And we'll have to leave it there. But it seems like the Biden administration isn't really making some of the best decisions. But we'll be right back with more here on Jenna Ellis Tonight. While underscoring the importance of the First Amendment protections here in the United States that other countries don't enjoy, Scotland is poised to basically outlaw satire and comedy. This coming from The Telegraph. Scotland is no longer a free country, the headline says. Next month, the infamous Hate Crime and Public Order of Scotland Act finally comes into force. Essentially, it allows the courts to jail individuals for writing or posting any comment that is deemed to, quote, stir up hatred against a protected group, including disability, race, religion, and inevitably transgender identity. Leaked training material produced from Police Scotland suggests the force will specifically target performers, with officers advised that offending material could be communicated, quote, through public performance of a play. It risks making Scotland one of the most censorious in Europe. So, I guess that this is going to still outlaw Shakespeare, apparently. But joining me now is Danny Polishchuk, who is a comedian. And Danny, this is really scary that this kind of law would actually go into effect.
Yeah, thankfully I don't live in Scotland. I actually posted just on Twitter a minute ago. I got an email from my mom who's, she kind of follows this stuff. And I just got an email this morning from my mom that says, "Do not perform in Scotland," was just the title of the email. And then that was it. There was no body of the email. It just said, "Do not perform in Scotland." And that was it. So it's getting out there. But yeah, there's something funny about the idea of them jailing people who are performing plays and stuff, actors, just because I don't think they do great in jails, nor would I. But yeah, it's crazy. I'm originally from Canada, and they're not doing that, but they're not far off from doing that either. So I am happy that I live in the U.S. now. That's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And, and this does, as I mentioned in the opening, underscore the importance of First Amendment protections. But even here in the United States, some of the government censorship is really getting out of control. And whether or not the U.S. Supreme Court decides to go ahead and uphold even social media, public forums, and some of those types of spaces. We saw the Babylon Bee as a satirical website get virtually canceled for, I think it was close to a year, because they dared to post that their man of the year is Dr. Rachel Levine. And that, of course, went against formerly Twitter's hate speech policy. This is so ridiculous, but this is the left's DEI and critical theory in action. And we're seeing that come to fruition in Scotland. So how does that actually impact performers like you? And, I think your mom's advice is pretty wise, but how could this impact you if this kind of law was here in the United States or, more worldwide?
I mean, in the United States, I suppose. I mean, I actually know, I don't know if you're affiliated, but there's a comedian in Canada. His name was, because I only lived in the US for the last 5 years or so now. And Canada has this thing called the Human Rights Tribunal and when I was living there, this was happening where basically this comedian, Mike Ward, he's a comedian in Quebec. He made a joke about this kid, not even on like a televised special. It was literally in just like a club, not televised, nothing like that. And then a reporter wrote about it. And then the kid's family sued him. He was taken to this thing called the Human Rights Tribunal in Canada. And then they ordered him to essentially pay like $45,000. He's refused to pay it. And then he had to take it to the Supreme Court to literally explain why this was just a joke and was not harmful. Now, here, I'm not worried about that happening here, thankfully. But yeah, I travel doing comedy. I don't know. It seems so far-fetched that a joke I would tell would land me in jail, but I mean, I guess it's possible because who even decides what's hate speech? That's the real issue, right?
Right. Absolutely. And, I want to flash the meme right now that says, that's the joke. I mean, from The Simpsons, because I think everybody can tell what comedy is. And if you make certain things off limits for comedy, then comedy ceases to be funny. I mean, I think isn't the whole point of this that it's equal opportunity, and shouldn't the left actually like that premise, that you can make fun of everyone, and that's kind of the entire point.
Yeah, and I mean, they don't like making fun. They want to strictly define, kind of the parameters of what you're allowed to make fun of and whatnot, and what's punching down and what's not. But I mean, America did kind of have this with Lenny Bruce in, the 60s, where he was literally told, like, if you go on stage, he had, police at his side, and they said, if you swear on stage, we're going to arrest you. And he would drop an F-bomb and they would literally come on stage and pull him off. And it seems like we got past that here, but this is again, and it's funny that you have this guy on, I don't know if you know who this comedian is right here. This guy's Frankie Boyle. I don't know if you know who that is. He's a famous Scottish comedian. Okay, he's a famous Scottish comedian. He is has said some of the most atrocious things you could ever imagine in your life. And then in maybe the past 5 years, post-Trump, maybe 8 years, he went super far left and essentially kind of closed the door behind him and essentially said, all that, there's all these types of speech that are not okay. But he said the wildest stuff you could comprehend, literally horrific jokes. Now, there were jokes, and he's obviously free to do them, and some of them were quite funny. But him specifically, I'm sure, I don't know how he feels about it. I bet you he's actually fine with it because he goes, well, hate speech is wrong. But you're anything you said 10 years ago would get you life in Scotland, because this guy was insane specifically.
Well, and isn't that the point, though, is that even if he's very far to the left, and I'm, of course, not a fan of the crude comedy at all. I don't think that we need to be vulgar in order to be funny, but that's just my personal opinion. But for this guy, even if he's so far to the left, this type of law could come back and capture stuff that he said 10 years ago that now the left is saying, well, we're going to cancel that. And that was, against all of our new rules, because they keep reinventing more things that make them outraged. And so where is the line, and who gets to decide what is hate speech and what is too offensive for comedy? I mean, that should be left up to the audience. If he has an audience and people want to listen to that, then okay. I mean, that shouldn't be any government regulator. That should be the free market. So, how does this overall have a chilling effect potentially on comedy?
Honestly, I don't think it does, because I mean, it might in Scotland. If you live in Scotland, yeah, I mean, I'm sure that might have an issue, because especially because I can't imagine that it's going to be super concrete what the rules are. It's going to be incredibly vague. Right. All it's going to take is, you have some interaction with an audience member, which is what happened in Canada in another instance where, you see these videos online all the time where a comedian destroys a heckler, someone's heckling or whatever. And then you have some interaction and then they walk away with it feeling some kind of way. And then they have this government authority that they can now go to and file a formal complaint saying, hey, this person basically demeaned me. And you're like, well, you're at a comedy show and you started it. Right?
And you're you're there just because you want to be. I mean, this whole thing of like the tribunal, I mean, this goes against totally everything that we as Americans should stand for. And I feel bad for Scotland, but we'll be right back with more here on Jenna Ellis Tonight. And we're back with our power panel, which for this fine Thursday evening includes John Jackson, a Democrat strategist, Mark Lauder, the Chief Communications Officer for the America First Policy Institute, and John Cardillo, who is former NYPD and a Republican strategist. So this story about this Scottish hate crime law is absolutely ridiculous and simply underscores the necessity of First Amendment protections here in the United States. This is what one Scottish comedian had to say.
So they've passed this hate crime act, which basically criminalizes. It extends the reach of hate crime laws into the privacy of your own home. You know, previously you had a sort of a privacy get out clause. That's where the reach of the government didn't come into private conversations in your own home. And it also extends onto the stage. They've literally had the police have a training that says that hate crime could occur on stage as part of a play or a performance. Which, I mean, that's terrifying. Are they gonna go in and into the pantomime and arrest the ugly sisters for what they did to Cinderella? It's an absolute nonsense. The whole.
All right, so let's see, John Cardillo, let's go to you first. And, this is something that I think is just a foreshadowing of what could come to the United States if the Supreme Court is not willing to protect our fundamental God-given pre-political rights that the First Amendment is just designed to preserve and protect.
You know, Jenna, this is so preposterous to me because you're talking to a guy that began his career as a cop in the Bronx pre-Rudy Giuliani. All right. I mean, my first night on the job, I had a gangbanger slashed to the bone on his face. We had a missing child. We had a shooting. We had a sexual assault. This is what Scottish politicians and law enforcement are focused on. I mean, using this standard, arguably any one of the four of us here, if we traveled to Scotland, could be arrested for things we've posted on social media, for things we've said on air, because this seems very, very arbitrary and very subjective. The furthest left politician in Scotland is going to give their own interpretation and say, oh, that offended me. They made fun of someone with red hair and freckles. I have red hair and freckles. That's a hate crime. They're going to prison. I mean, this is just chilling. And it should send a chill down the spine of everyone in the world, not just Americans. And shame on Scottish law enforcement for enforcing this if they choose to do so.
Yeah, and that really begs the question about America's hate crime laws, Mark Lauder, that, it does seem very vague and arbitrary. And as we continue down this kind of woke it hole for American policy, we're seeing that a lot of these ministries of truth, I mean, even former Twitter owned, by Jack Dorsey, that censored the Babylon Bee just for posting that headline that the man of the year was Rachel Levine, that got censored on social media. I mean, nobody is yet getting arrested for some of these posts. Well, I mean, actually, that's not true. Douglas Mackey for posting a meme back in 2016. I mean, these types of things, the reality is that this is happening in America too.
Yeah, I think the thing we have to remember about hate crimes is that there needs to be a crime. It is not a crime to offend someone or to be offended. I mean, how many times throughout history can we point to artists who were pushing boundaries, even pushing societal norms that then later became mainstream, that later became celebrated, for their daring, whether their daring performances, their speech, things that you couldn't say maybe 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago that are commonplace today. And when we start criminalizing speech, even if it's speech that's offensive or wrong, then we're basically criminalizing everyone in the freedom of thought. And that's just, it's un-American.
Yeah, so John Jackson, let's get you to weigh in here because, the Democrats generally, in a broad sense, would like to suggest that things that even I would say are absolutely heinous speech. I completely disagree with racist speech, with anti-Semitic speech. I mean, all of these things. But as much as I may disagree with it, does the government have the right to censor it or to impose these type of hate speech laws?
I think there's no point in the law getting involved with people saying stupid stuff. We can let the public judge that and take it from there. I think that when it comes to comedians are supposed to be pressing boundaries. And I think that it set a real bad precedent when Will Smith assaulted Chris Rock. And I think that the government getting involved with a comedian saying the wrong thing would only encourage violence like that at a comedy show. And I think that if you don't like a certain type of comedy, write a column about it, right? Write a story about it. Talk about why you should support them, but don't arrest somebody for just saying something on stage for laughs.
Yeah. So, John, let's come back to you, John Cardillo. I mean, it seems like Scotland is covering even things like Shakespeare plays. I mean, and back in the day when, Shakespeare and some of these other playwrights and the court jesters, I mean, the entire point was to make fun of the crown. And that's what comedy basically is. And even when SNL, like President Trump said in his True Social post earlier today, when SNL was actually doing a good job and was funny, they're poking fun at our government. They're poking fun at a lot of our leaders. That absolutely has to be preserved in a free society. Otherwise, we're not free to even comment on our government any longer.
Well, look, a very wise guy once said politics is downstream of culture, and this is a prime example of that. These politicians do not want to be criticized. They are the most self-important, thin-skinned morons on the planet, and they have their agendas. They have their pet protected classes. And, somebody wants to identify as a cat and go to the restroom in a litter box. They want to protect these people who should be relentlessly mocked. Let's be honest about this. It's funny. But politics is downstream of culture. So if they can start censoring the most egregious examples, right, the things that many of us would say, okay, maybe that was a bit over the racist line, over the bit anti-Semitic line. It's a very slippery slope until they get to Dave Chappelle doing harmless bits about trans people, making him uncomfortable, because then they can control the narrative, they can control the culture, and as a result, they can control everything, which has always been the ultimate goal of the left.
Yeah. And who gets to define what is or isn't hate speech? I mean, that really is the ultimate question, and why the the Murphy versus Missouri case at the U.S. Supreme Court is, in my opinion, the most important free speech case in the 21st century. But that is all the time that we have with our panel today. Thanks so much to John Jackson, Mark Lauder, and John Cardillo. You can always reach me and my team, Jenna, at salemnewschannel.com. Make it a great day, and I'll see you tomorrow for Friday.